So we're going to talk about why we gather materials at events and examples of how the Commons has done event reporting in the past, preparing for events and tips for on the day, and also tips for event organisers that set things up well for materials to be gathered. So, sorry if there's a bit of background noise. So, you know, in terms of the why gather materials, I think it's an interesting thing because conferences can kind of be just in and of themselves. You go to the place for this amount of time, you have the experience, then you go back to wherever you've been from. And of course, the event is about learning, but sometimes the way that ripples out from the event is quite organic or unstructured. So someone might go to a conference, get really inspired about something, kind of start to incorporate some of that in their work or tell other people about it. But, you know, sometimes things can get a bit lost in translation that way. And also, it's really about, did you have the privilege to be able to attend the event to learn what was going on there? And people might have geographic or financial or just life barriers to being present at conferences and events. So, you know, the role of the Commons Library is to make activism smarter and stronger. We're really keen to kind of gather the collective wisdom of people engaged in social change. And conferences are these key times of kind of knowledge production and distribution. And we want to especially encourage the distribution part. So when we gather materials at conferences, it means that the people who attended can deepen their learning by having access to the materials afterwards. And especially if they're going to be sharing it on in their organisations, being able to refer to the words that the presenter shared or the slides or the recording, you know, supports that sharing on. And also that the people who didn't attend, you know, still get to learn, and that could be people on the other side of the world after quite a bit of time's elapsed. So I guess we want to make these materials available, really accessible and in an ongoing way, which is why Commons has prioritised gathering materials at conferences, and why we really love to have more volunteers engaged with that, so that if there's an event that people are attending in their own community, you know, potentially that could be reported on and shared more broadly. So we thought we'd run through some examples of what we've done in the past. And this conference content curation. In some cases, it is quite a big project to, you know, purposely attend an event to gather lots of materials. But there is the scope for it to be like a one-off smaller event, like these skills sessions that we're also thinking about. How do we get the most out of the session by making it available after it's finished?
So one good example of a conference that the Commons team and librarians and volunteers captured last year was the Forward Organised conference, which was an online conference for community organisers and digital campaigners. And there were over 60 workshops, keynotes, briefings. It was a massive conference over 2 days. So our team came together and we all got to choose different presentations and things to capture the knowledge. Some were easier than others. Some of the speakers gave us their notes, and it's completely reliant on our note taking. But we managed to capture quite a few talks and share the knowledge in the Commons. But especially for people who can't go, I think is very important.
And one thing I was kind of thinking is that the event organisers, they're really focused on just running the event. So sometimes they're thinking about the materials that might be available after, but a lot of time that's not like high on their list. So the Commons can kind of offer something that's complementary when we're looking at doing this curation that can be supportive of the organisers as well. And certainly we've built that relationship with Australian Progress over a number of events now. So just to give you an idea of different kinds of ways that we can gather materials from conferences, in some situations, articles will be written by presenters. So one example is Renee Carr from Fair Agenda, she gave a really short, snappy speech at Forward and Organise, but she had such thorough notes that there wasn't a big job for her to then convert that into an article for us. So she sent it to us, we uploaded it, and then we shared it back with her to check that it was all good. And that was kind of like a easy, fully formed article that we could then share on. Another way to do it is that somebody is participating in the session or listening to the presenter, and then they write an article based on the key things they took away from that session. So this is an example from Joel Dignam, who's done some event reporting at a few conferences with us, and writes a lot of book reviews and other content on the Commons. But he listened to the plenary speech from Renat Schenker-Osorio and sort of distilled these top 3 messaging tips. So that's one way that we can gather materials.
Another way is from workshops. So workshops are often great because you have often a lot of knowledge in the room. Workshops are also pretty tricky to gather content from because they're often participatory. This is an example of a workshop I went to at the Forward Organised conference, which was an in-person workshop. And it was very high energy. You had to participate, but I managed to scribble about 10 pages of very incoherent notes. I thought, how am I going to make this into something that I can, people can learn from? But in the end, I got there. So my advice is just write everything down or record everything if you can, because you never know what you might use later on to make a good knowledge sharing piece of content. Oh, this was another talk that was at the Forward Organised conference, an online presentation from Caitlin in America about deep canvassing. She was a very inspirational speaker, so we concentrated on her speech, but also in her speech, she also gave tips on a particular report or a podcast or a tool. So I went down the wormholes and followed all these different resources and then kept finding more and more resources. So what started as just a presentation from her became a fully fledged resource with lots of different resources for all sorts of people who've never heard of deep canvassing and what is it, and to experts who are like looking for deep canvassing scripts to use. So it was a good example of knowledge building upon knowledge. And she was very happy with the resource as well. She's like, wow, can I share this in America? I'm like, of course you can. So it can also help the presenters because they're so concentrating on just giving their speech that it helps their work as well and share the knowledge broader. Oops.
So another thing we can do at conferences is some crowdsourcing. So it's not just the people up the front who have the knowledge. A lot of the participants, have a lot of knowledge to share as well. This is an example of links that we gathered around disability justice from the Virtual Progress Conference. And being an online conference, the event chat was quite active, and during different sessions, people were sharing examples of resources that they thought were relevant. So, it's handy when there's a social movement librarian there to kind of snaffle up all of those links and then put it into an actual article. So there's something that people can kind of hang on to after the event. And we also, once we drafted that, ran it past Elle Gibbs, who's a disability justice activist, to check, that what we'd done kind of worked, and she made a few other contributions. But it was a great way of kind of capturing the knowledge of presenters and participants from that conference.
We've also captured lots of training sessions. So the Changemakers Organising School ran training sessions via video during the pandemic or during lockdowns, and they ended up with over 37 training sessions. So we managed to pull together their slides, their recordings, notes, blurbs, all into like one coherent article, so that it was really easy for people to now come along and they can attend this organising school and become quite the expert going through it by themselves. And as we're showing today, it's become our way of practice now to share our events and document them so that we can share them with others as well. So if people can't come it's there. Oops.
And just thinking about some different tools that we can use at conferences as well. I mean, some of these are about increasing participation in an event or creating other opportunities to share knowledge. Live tweeting conferences can be great, and kind of being active in the thread and seeing what other people are sharing. So often, you know, if there's a plenary and there's an inspiring speaker, it's kind of the pull-out quote that you put in the tweet, you know, where everyone's like, oh, that was a little gem of wisdom that we want to share. And so, you know, you can kind of be pulling out different bits from the event in real time and giving people who aren't there a sense of what's happening. And then afterwards also, those are notes you can go back to, look at the hashtag to see what else is being shared that might be worth, you know, preserving and passing on. I've mentioned the event chat as well. One thing we do as Commons librarians is think about the sessions that are being run and the relevant resources that go with it, because learning at conferences can be kind of a way for people to open a door into a new area of learning. So if the person who's presenting has materials that, you know, people want to know about. I remember this when Marshall Gans was presenting at Virtual Progress. You know, we were sharing different GANS resources because some people are like, oh, I've never heard of this, or this sounds so exciting. And you go, well, there you go, you get to dig into it in more depth. I put Vox Pops there as something that can be an interesting thing to do with participants to get, you know, a sense of themes or ideas that might be bubbling in the conference space. Polls can be a useful part of an online event, you know, in terms of just polling the attendees about different topics. Can be good for, you know, building participation, but also getting a snapshot of where people are at. Also stalls or virtual booths. So I have, like many years ago, I had a stall at the Anarchist Book Fair, and I had an interactive chart where people could write down their favourite anarchist books. And then after that, I turned that into an article, which was like a fun reading list for people. But, you know, very easy to do. With online events, virtual booths have become a bit of a thing, which is, you know, for people who don't want to eat their lunch in the lunch break, but they want to keep talking, sometimes there'll be the space to come and interact with people. And the Commons did that at a recent event as well, giving people an introduction to the resources that we have.
I was just going to talk about some tips for preparing for events that we've learnt over the last little while, especially for the big conferences as well. It was a real sharp learning curve. So tip is to review the program really well and in depth, and identify, kind of maybe even have an Excel or something where you put all the talks and who can go, who's interested in what, who's available to go to what. Because when you've got 60 talks and just a handful of people, you have to really be strategic about what you go to. We also set up a collaborative note stock, including all the talks and links to the talks and our notes. And so if we got a transcript, we could include it, or a link to the slides. So this document became 160 pages long. It was very long, but at least everything was kept in the one spot, which is really useful. If you can, it's useful to contact the presenters in advance to let them know that you'll be making an article or some content out of their talk, and if that's okay with them, to check in with them. And they might be happy to submit their own notes or slides, and also to check if there's anything sensitive and get their consent, because some talks that, you know, can be, they might want to keep private. Or so, for example, in the online talks, when people go into breakout rooms, like that kind of information isn't captured necessarily, because that's often more private. And also to brief your team on your writing style. So what kind of writing do you want to come out of the conference? Like, is your style a how-to, or is your style 3 tips on this? Or so that's really important, so you don't have all sorts of different writing styles going on. And also, if you're going to do social media, plan who's on what platform, what time you might be posting. Is it going to relate for example, a tweet at a certain time, somebody's doing a talk. Are you posting a link to a useful resource during someone's talk? So having a plan of how to do that and who's doing it is really useful. We also
go ahead.
Go for it.
I was just thinking with one of those from Forward and Organise, when we looked at the program, there was a session which had like 5 campaigners sharing 5 tips each. And it just seemed like something that was quite well suited for social media. So the template was made up with all of the people's things. Then we just typed in the 5 tips once the session had happened. So it was a way to kind of do quite a timely social media post based on an opportunity that we saw in the program.
Having those templates was really handy. So we had a great volunteer, Sophie, who came up with these templates below. And so we could quickly just pop in the presenters, the title, and post it really quickly on Instagram or Facebook. On the day, it was really useful to have one channel that we all communicated on, whether it's a WhatsApp group or a Slack channel or whatever you decide, but just having something useful, just logistics, or you heard that there was a great speaker, can someone go to this talk, things like that. And as I mentioned before, it was really useful to have everything in one document. And definitely very useful if the presenters are on board and you can check in with them before or after the talk. It makes it really easy to then gather the content. And most of them were really excited that we could share their knowledge and their expertise with others. And also factor in breaks when you're collecting all this knowledge and information. It can be very tiring. You can get depleted quite quickly by the end of the day. So make sure you have your breaks and your snacks so you can be on top of your game for collecting all that knowledge.
That little picture with the brain made me also think about like having enough charge in your devices if it's in person.
Yeah. Charge in your brain and all your tech. Also, when I met people and they found out what I was doing, they were quite excited about it. So it's a good idea if other people are interested, if you maybe have a form ready and it's like, oh, here, you can collect notes too if you want to come on board, because I'm quite a note taker anyway. So I would be quite happy if somebody came along and said, oh, sure, can we use your notes? That would be great. So having a form ready can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, and just wanted to kind of share some tips for event organisers who might want to make it easier for materials to be gathered at their events. So some of this is, relates to what we've already kind of said, but this one around letting presenters know that content will be gathered, because it's sometimes people who are presenting at conferences, they might be putting their presentation together at the last minute, but we could follow up with them around materials. Other people might be quite prepared in advance and even send their materials prior to the conference. We did have someone who was running an event last year who published their handout on the Commons prior to the event happening. And so when they ran the event, they could then refer people to the Commons site to, for the follow-up notes. So yeah, that connection with presenters can be really important. And have an easy system for presenters to share their materials. So for example, Progress had a system where their presenters could share their slides into a Google folder, and then we could access that Google folder. Let people know that it's optional. So I think one thing is that sometimes it's enough just for somebody to present an event and you don't want to add any extra work on. So making sure that people understand that. If the Commons is curating at your event, let participants and presenters know our role, because that'll make it less confusing. People have more of a sense of like, oh, you're the people who are, gathering the materials. Yeah, and as Archie was saying, inviting participants to take notes, share notes and write articles. And also, as Ian was saying earlier, around recording. So record your sessions, have one platform where you upload your videos. Sometimes when we've gone to gather materials that might be in a few different places. Have a consistent naming protocol, so it makes sense. And include the session blurb and presenter bios along with the video. Sometimes all of the different info can kind of get spread around and you've got a video that's there without any supporting information. So just trying to have a good system around reporting. Also, best practice for accessibility is around captioning, and sort of folks are using the closed caption options and publishing their videos with captions enabled.
Sure, we thought we'd share our lessons learned as well. Have a debrief directly after the event, even if you're completely fatigued, it's still useful to capture that information that you've got floating around in your head. Have shared lists with your team. So you meet so many people, or you've heard a good website or a good idea or a good contact. It's like, oh, I'd like to interview that person. So if you've got a place to document it there and then, you're much more likely to follow it up. Also capture what questions and information people are seeking. What kind of questions are people asking? Is there a general trend? So this can help the conference organisers for future events. And it's also a great way for people like us to say, okay, people are looking for, like for example, the deep canvassing scripts, and we can pull together that information and share that knowledge with others. Make sure you have all your templates, documents easy to find, because things can get tricky pretty quickly with different things floating around. So have a system from the beginning. Invite other people to become participants and event reporters, share their notes with you. And also expectation management. Every session doesn't result in new content. We found that some of the talks we went to, which we thought were definitely going to be an article, turned out not to be so useful, and then others turned out to be great. So you've got to just be open-minded and see what happens and gather what you can.